Oh boy, here we go again. This is only the 5th level so far in the rundown, and yet it's also the 3rd one to have an error alarm in it. No wonder I called R4 the error alarm rundown way back then. However, the error alarm in this level is actually a little bit different compared to the ones in R4A2 and A3. In those two, the error alarms were tied to the overload bulkhead doors, but the one in B2 is actually tied to the secondary bulkhead door. And to make matters even worse, you have to initiate that alarm very early on in the level if you're going for a prisoner efficiency run. So yeah, things are gonna start getting a bit more difficult from this point on. Hello everyone, Professor Scaler here, and welcome to the alternate R4B2 level guide. Just like always, we're starting off with your loadout, and this time around, I recommend you bring with you a bio tracker, a mine deployer, and 2 mid to close range sentries, so burst and or shotgun sentries. The reason why I recommend bio tracker is because in this level, there are a fair amount of zones that are going to have a ton of enemies sleeping inside of them, smalls, bigs, scouts, maybe even something else if you're going for the optional objectives. So being able to just look at a bio tracker and see how many enemies are on the other side of that door before you open it up and run headfirst in can save you from a pretty bad situation. That, and there is a lot of dense fog in this level, and if you're going for a prisoner efficiency run, this fog is going to be a nuisance quite often. When it comes to the mine deployer, I'm recommending this because there are a few alarm doors as well as a blood door in this level if you're going for the overall objective that you're going to have to deal with. So having mines to just make those moments a little bit easier will help out. And again, some of these zones have a lot of enemies in them, so if the opportunity presents itself, it's always nice to just open up a door, shoot to pull the room, shut that door real quick, mine it, maybe even C-foam it so more enemies pile up on it, and just let the mine do most of the work for you. And last but not least, when it comes to sentries, I'm recommending burst or shotgun sentries just because we want close to mid-range sentries, as long-range sentries aren't going to work well for this level. Sniper sentry just doesn't really have enough time to actually shoot at the enemies before it makes it past them, even with bio-tracker symbiosis, so it falls off a bit. And the auto sentry, as much as I do like this tool, it's more of a support sentry. It's meant to stagger and weaken enemies, not really kill them off. And I feel like in a level like this, we just really want to kill off most or at least a decent amount of the enemies before they get to us. So having 2 sentries to benefit us during the alarms where we really just can't make good a use of mines or C-foam will make it so we don't have to do nearly as much shooting and we have a much higher chance of survival. Last thing to mention about the loadout is that if you are going for a main objective only run, feel free to replace one of the sentries with a C-foam launcher, as the main objective alarm doors are a little bit simpler to deal with than the ones in Overload, so having a mine C-foam combo will work out quite nicely. But if you are going for the prisoner efficiency run, don't bother with the C-foam launcher. The few times where C-foam could come in handy, you can easily just grab a C-foam grenade or trip mine or 2, which are pretty abundant in this level, and make do with those instead. Dropping down into the level, you'll see that your main objective is to bring 4 power cells to the generator cluster, which will be located inside zone 85. And those 4 power cells will be located inside zone 86, 87, 88, and 89. 1 each, no randomization to it, aside from exactly where they're located inside of the zones. Now, starting off inside zone 84, you're going to be able to find your very first bulkhead key in here, as well as your bulkhead door control and doors to the main and secondary objective. And right off the get-go, we need to make a decision on whether we're doing a main objective only run or if we're going to go for a prisoner efficiency run. Because if we want to go for prisoner efficiency, we have to do secondary right now. And as you may remember that I mentioned earlier in the guide, that secondary bulkhead door is going to have an error alarm tied to it. Which, yeah, that's a little bit annoying because that means we have to deal with it for basically the entirety of the level. We only get to explore this first zone before we initiate it. And to make matters worse, not only does this error alarm change up how we have to play the level, but so does the overload objective. Because the interesting thing about this level is, as I mentioned earlier, there is fog in it. And currently the fog is sort of at high tide. It's above you. And every time you plug a power cell in, it's going to lower that fog by a pretty fair amount. And when it comes to the main objective portion, some of those zones are sort of what I call low tide, and some of them are up and high tide. So if you're doing a main objective only run, you ideally would head into zone 88 and 89 to get the 2 power cells from in there, since the fog isn't going to block your sight. Come out, plug them into the generator cluster to lower the fog, and then you would go back into zone 86, 87, and then get the power cells from there when it's a little bit easier to see. But when it comes to the overload objective, we can't do that at all, because if we start plugging power cells in, we're going to actually lower the fog into the overload sector and make that a whole lot more difficult. And the reason why I'm mentioning all of this is because typically at this point, I would tell people, if you're interested in only the main objective portion of the guide, jump to the timestamp that you see on screen and we'll continue on there. But that's not really going to work with this level, because the way I'm going to tell you how to play it for a prisoner efficiency run is quite a bit different than how it is for the main objective only runs. So yeah, if you're doing main objective only, like I said, do the zones that are lower in elevation and get those power cells first, then plug them in, and then do the ones that are up higher, and you should be good. So yeah, continuing forth, we're going to do that full team scan for the secondary objective. That's going to unlock the bulkhead door to zone 177. We're going to head over there. As I said, the error alarm is tied to the door, and this error alarm will spawn in 3 regular strikers or shooters roughly every 50 seconds. The interesting thing about this error alarm though is that it will only spawn enemies from behind you towards the drop location where you came into the level from. So it makes it really easy to defend against this error alarm, because you can just have 2 people move up into the next zone, stealthily deal with the enemies, and the other 2 people literally just stay near the security door that leads into the room, and they just deal with the error alarm enemies as they come from behind by meleeing them, and you don't really have to worry about these enemies spawning up ahead and waking up a room filled with a ton of enemies. So yeah, from this point on, you'll be splitting up into 2 teams, people who are defending against the arrow waves from behind, and people who go up ahead to deal with the enemies. As for the security door zone 177, once you head in, you'll see your secondary objective is to find a specific terminal and put a command into it, and that terminal will actually be located inside of the zone with you. The only other thing really to take note of inside the zone, enemy-wise, would be the 2 scouts patrolling about. If you end up waking them up, I would just recommend everybody fall back into the zone and use that bulkhead door as a choke point with the sentries, and you should be good. But once they're dead, everybody can come inside, look around, grab resources. Your second and third bulkhead key will be in here, so make sure you grab both of them, and the terminal will be somewhere in the middle of the room. Just hop on, type in the command, it will cause a full team scan to appear, and once the full team scan is done, your secondary objective is completed, and all that's left for you to do is just head back out into zone 84, plug your bulkhead key into the door control once again to unlock the main door, and then we can head over to the security door to zone 85. That door itself is just going to be a full team scan, so finish the scan, open it up, and 2 people head inside while 2 people stay outside to defend. Inside of zone 85, there will be the generator cluster like I mentioned earlier. The 4 generators will be in the northwest corner, as well as a terminal. There will be a few enemies, as well as resources for you to collect, and there will be 2 security doors. One to the west, which leads you to zone 86, and one to the north to zone 88. Now, the security door to zone 88, which is at lower elevation, we're going to leave B for the time being, because we could go in there and just get those 2 power cells really easily, but there is a chance we could always die when dealing with the more difficult overload objective. So I find it's better to just beeline straight for that and get that done first, and if we survive it, then we can come back and do the easier portions of the main objective. So first, we're going to go to the security door to zone 86, which will have a class 3 alarm tied to it. And as you can see with the map overlay, there's only 1 possible spawn location for enemies, but there are no doors we can utilize whatsoever. So we're just going to want to place our sentries somewhere in the room. We can either place them in the tunnels between us and that security door, since the enemies will pretty much always go through there, or we could place it near that open security door itself. It's really up to you and your team, just wherever you think will be best. So get the sentry set up, and once your team is good to go, activate the alarm and get to work on the scans. And once the alarm is finished, you're going to open up that door and head into zone 86. When it comes to zone 86, in here there will be a fair amount of enemies spread throughout the fair amount of rooms. Some of them will be covered in fog, some of them you can actually see a little bit though, so it'll be a bit of an on and off experience. In here there will be your very first power cell, which if you happen to find it, you could take it back to the generator cluster. Just make sure you do not plug it in quite yet, just leave it on the floor. And there will also be a colored key card, which you are going to want this key card as you will need it in order to unlock the security door to zone 87, which is found further in. So go throughout the zone, deal with the enemies and everything you want, and once you have the key card, you can head over to the far western side where you'll find that security door, plug it in, and that'll give you access to the class 3 alarm that's tied to that door. And once again, as you can see with this map overlay, there are 2 different locations enemies can spawn from and 2 different doors we could utilize. So when you're ready to set for the alarm, I would recommend get the sentries down, maybe somewhere in the room with you. Again, it's sort of up to you. And then wait for an air alarm wave to spawn in. Once they spawn in, quickly rush out to deal with them. And once they are dead, shut the 2 doors, mine them, and then fall back and deal with the alarm. That way you actually blow up a fair amount of the alarm enemies on those doors, and air alarm enemies do not consume them instead. Then once you have finished the scans and all the enemies are dead, you can pack up your sentries and head into the zone itself. Inside zone 87, you'll be able to find your second power cell, as well as more enemies and resources to deal with. but more importantly, you'll be able to find your bulkhead door control and the door to the overload objective in the far back room. So go throughout the zone, deal with the power stone now if you feel like it, or just simply leave that for later. And once you have found the bulkhead door control, plug your third and final bulkhead key into it, then do the full team scan, and that will unlock the security door to zone 291. Then you can head over there and open up the bulkhead door as there's no scan tied to it, and just like before, some people are going to stay outside to defend, while some people are going to head inside. And inside zone 291, you'll see that your overload objective is to collect 6 OSIPs, and there's actually a total of 9 of them in the overload sector, and these OSIPs will be spread randomly throughout every single one of the zones, except for the one that you start off in. So zone 291 won't have any, but zone 292, 293, 294, and 295 will have them in there. Although you will not have to go to every single one of the zones. From my experiences, you're only going to have to ever go to 3 out of these 4 zones, and most of the time it seems like you can go to any 3 that you feel like going into, but just in case, you might want to double check on a terminal before you start opening up security doors, as I do believe there is a small chance you will be forced to go into one of the 4 zones in particular, and then the other 2 you could just choose at random. So going into zone 291, there will be a fair amount of enemies in here, including 3 scouts usually, so try to deal with them best you can. Again, if they wake up, just simply use the bulkhead door as a good funnel point. But once the room has been cleared out, you can look around, grab resources and whatnot, get on a terminal, check where your OSIPs are. When it comes to all the side zones, zone 292 can be found to the eastern side of the zone that is going to have a class 6 alarm tied to it. Zone 293 can be found to the western side that is going to have a class 4 alarm tied to it and is also a blood door. And then zone 294 will be found to the southern end, and this is just going to simply be a full team scan. Zone 295 is connected to zone 294 further inside of that zone. So we have a full team scan door and 2 alarm doors in here, and I would recommend that if you find yourself going into zone 292 and 293, it might sound crazy, but the best thing to do is actually pull both alarms at the same time. Because as you can see with this map overlay, there's only one possible spawn location for the enemies. But assuming we leave this door shut here and these 2 doors open, it seems to derp out their AI a lot. They'll just stutter back and forth in that room quite a bit before they finally go through the open doors, and then they'll wrap around and actually come after us. Eventually, they might break down that shut door, so I would recommend you also mine it and C-foam it just to give it extra reinforcement. But when it comes to your sentries, just place them in the room with you facing towards the bulkhead door. That way, as enemies do funnel in, the sentries will just tear them apart a bit. As for the 2 security doors, I recommend you activate the full team scan to the class 6 alarm door first, as that one will not appear next to the door, but it will actually move somewhere else into the room. And once you pull the door, quickly run over to the western side and activate the full team scan for the class 4 alarm door, as that one will appear right next to the door itself. Then when you finish that full team scan, run back over it and do the other full team scan, and then just do a 2 and 2 split. 2 people focus on the class 4 alarm, while 2 people focus on the class 6 alarm, and then you just help each other out and you shoot at the enemies from afar as they're finally making their way into the room. Once you finish both of these alarms and the scans are all done, just focus on dealing with every single one of the enemies coming in from the alarm itself, and once everything is cleared out, you can just regroup and then you can head into zone 292 itself. When it comes to zone 292 itself, there will be some OSIPs in here, but there are going to be a fair amount of enemies, mostly giant strikers and giant shooters, but there will be a few small boys, and there's also going to be 3 scouts patrolling about. So take it a bit slow in here. The defenders have a pretty easy time. They just simply stay 1 row behind you, and you should be good. Once you have all the resources and the OSIPs are in here, you can just leave the zone, and then head over to the western side to the security door to zone 293. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this security door is also a blood door, so place a mine or 2 on it. And I recommend that once you open up the blood door, fall back somewhere else. Because the blood door itself doesn't spawn in a whole lot of enemies, but the room it's connected to is gigantic. And usually there's a lot of enemies sleeping inside of it. And most of the time, every single one of them is going to wake up shortly after that blood door opens. So instead of holding out at the blood door itself and putting yourself in a bit of a rough spot, fall back to some other location where you have a door that you can shut, mine, and maybe even C-foam. That way you can basically make another makeshift blood door and just blow up a lot of the enemies all at once. That, or at least fall back to a position where you could place down your sentries and hold out a little bit better without getting beamed down by all of the hybrids, shooters, and strikers themselves. But once you have dealt with every single one of the enemies from the blood door, you can head into the zone. This zone is covered in pitch black darkness, but for the most part, it's not too difficult to traverse through. Just go throughout the first room, make sure all the enemies actually woke up and came after you, and if not, deal with them bit by bit. And when you make your way to the back end of it, you'll find another small door you can just open up. That second room will also typically have a lot of enemies in it, but as long as you have at least one leftover mine, you can just open up the door, shoot it, shut the door real quick, mine it, and maybe even seafoam it, and most of the enemies should blow up to the mine, in which case you can then go into that room and use the terminal that's immediately to the right of you to ping everything inside the zone. Once you have all the OSIPs and resources, you can head out of here and then make your way back to the southern security door to zone 294, do the full team scan to that, and open up that door. As for zone 294 itself, it's a little bit simpler. There should only be one scout inside the zone, as well as a few smalls and bigs here and there, but nothing too bad compared to the other two zones. There will obviously be more resources and OSIPs, so go around and collect all of them. And at this point, either you've collected all the OSIPs you need, in which case you could just leave, or maybe you're still going to need a few more, in which case you will have to head into zone 295. That security door can be found to the far southern end of zone 294, and this security door itself is going to have a class 5 alarm tied to it. As you can see with the map overlay though, there's again only one spawn location for enemies and one door right here that we can utilize. So I would recommend wait until an airwave spawns in. Once they do, rush out to kill them, and once they're dead, shut the door, mine it, and seafoam it, and then place your sentries either near that door so it will start shooting at enemies after they break it down, or maybe place it near the hole in the wall that is the room divider. That way, as they're entering into the room with you, then the sentries will shoot at them and weaken them quite a bit. Once everything's set up, activate the alarm door and get to work on the scans. And once you finish every single one of the scans, make sure you kill off all of the enemies from the alarm before you open up that door, because zone 295 is a bit different compared to the other ones you've gone through up to this point. There will not be any scouts inside zone 295. There will not be that many strikers or shooters or even giant strikers, just a little bit. The big concern about zone 295 itself is the fact that inside the zone there are 2 sleeping birthers. And if they wake up, especially both of them at the same time, that can spell trouble for your team. So I would recommend, again, 1 or 2 people stay outside and defend against enemies while the other people sneak their way through. You can stealth kill some enemies as long as you know for a fact you'll be safe and you won't wake up anything too dangerous, and just make your way through. Once you get all the OSIPs from in here, just leave. Don't do the stupid thing like my team did in the background footage where we run around a corner, accidentally wake up a birther, and then decide, hey, let's just melee it for fun. Take this zone seriously, because if you're not experienced at the game, this zone can very quickly end your run. But once you've collected all the OSIPs from whichever one of these zones you were going into in this overload sector, you can then head out, because once you get all 6, your overload objective is completed, and the only thing left to do is just backtrack into the main objective sectors and get all the power cells that are still remaining. So go back into zone 87 and 86, and if you haven't already, get the power cells from in there, bring them back into zone 85 where the generator cluster is, and just leave them by those generators. Again, just make sure you do not plug them in quite yet. Then all you have to do is head over to the security door to zone 88, which is just simply a full team scan, open it up, and head in there. Zone 88 will have your 3rd power cell, as well as a lot of regular strikers and shooters sleeping throughout it, so be cautious as you deal with every single one of them. And at the back end of the zone, you'll find your security door to zone 89. This door is going to be a class 4 alarm, so one last time, let's take a look at a map overlay. As you can see, there's only one possible spawn location for enemies, but there are 3 different routes they can take. So what I recommend you do is, once again, wait for an airwave to spawn in, rush out, deal with them, and just kill off every single one of them, and then just run throughout the zone, shut all 6 of these doors that I've highlighted, and then make sure that the 3 that lead directly into your room are mined, and if you have seafoam grenades or trip mines, use them to seafoam the doors either right away, or once you know which route they're going to take, as sometimes they will only ever take one of the 3 routes to try to get to you and your team. Once you're ready to go, activate the alarm and get to work on the scans. And once we have finished with this alarm and all the enemies are dead, pack up your sentries, open up the door, and head into zone 89. In there will be a fair amount of strikers and shooters, as well as a single scout patrolling about, and your power cell will usually spawn all the way in the far back reaches of the zone. So go throughout here just like you have been up to this point in the level, just deal with the enemies, grab your resources, and once you have that power cell, you can carry it all the way back out into zone 85, and at this point the only thing really left to do is plug all 4 power cells into the generator cluster. However, I recommend you do not plug them all in at the same time, because apparently there is a glitch where if you plug them in too quickly, it will actually cause the full team scan afterwards to not appear, and you become soft locked and you can't complete this level. So plug one in, then maybe wait a few seconds, plug in the second, wait a few more seconds, then the third, and then the fourth. And once you plug the 4th power cell in, the lights will go out temporarily, and shortly after they come back on, a full team scan is going to appear next to the generator cluster. While this full team scan is present, an alarm is going to be going on in the background, but as soon as you finish the full team scan, the alarm shuts off, so you don't really need to do any preparation for it. just simply keep an ear out and have the biotracker person tag the enemies, as the entire level will fill up with fog once you plug in all 4 power cells, and just sit there and deal with them. Or if they spawn really far away from you, you could just simply finish the full team scan and then run all the way back to extraction and deal with the enemies there. It's really up to you and your team. Personally, I like to deal with them here and now, because the funny thing about that error alarm is because it forces the waves to spawn away from you close towards spawn, when you get back to the extraction scan and hold out there, the arrow wave will actually spawn directly on top of you. So I don't really like dealing with the enemies from the generator cluster alarm when I have the risk of a few enemies spawning right on my noggin. But once you make your way back to extraction, that's really all there is to it. You have to hold out a little bit on this scan, as it does take a little bit of time to complete, but there is no proper extraction alarm, so you just have to worry about 3 enemies popping out of thin air every 50 or so seconds, and that's basically it. Once you get the extraction scan all the way to 100%, you are done and you have completed alternate R4B2. And that's all there is to it. Alternate R4B2 was the first alternate level where I thought stamina would really become an issue, but I was pleasantly surprised. Due to the design of the level with the fog, the enemies, and carrying those cells around, I don't often find myself feeling the effects of stamina here. Sure, there's plenty of running around in the level you have to do, and even an error alarm that'll be in play almost since the very beginning, but there's enough to do in each one of these zones that'll slow you down a bit and let you catch your breath. So despite having many unfortunate experiences with the original B2, I find the alternate version is actually quite enjoyable and nowhere near as traumatizing. As always though, thank you for watching this video all the way to the very end. I do hope that it was able to provide you with some assistance in beating this level. If you have any tips or tricks to this level that you want to share, any questions for me, or you just have something in general that you want to say, please do let me know down in the comments. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, and if you want to join my lovely community, there's a link to my Discord down in the description, as well as some other links you might be interested in. Among those links being one to the official GTFO merch store, which, as always, I highly recommend you check it out if you're a fellow GTFO enthusiast and you're looking to pick up some sweet merch. Until next time, there's only one more level to go before we're halfway through the rundown, and this next one is a bit of a lengthy one, so hopefully I'll see all you wonderful people in the next video.